when you're in that survival mode, when you're just like, what can we start with? Hearing from the staff that are there, that are the ones you trust, show up every day and ask what we can do to improve their job experience or improve their ability to support people. I think we always think it's the big changes we need to make, the big expensive changes. So then we overanalyze it and don't know where to start. And sometimes it's small things that just build on each other. We can learn a lot just by asking and being very open to the answers that we hear.
Hmm.
And then starting to take action on those items and put a plan in place.
Welcome to IDD Leader, where human services leaders grow their impact, lead with heart, and build the workplaces our field deserves. I'm your host, Nate Beers. Let's dive in. You know those stories where at the beginning, the hero of the story is just barely surviving? It's a struggle, and they can see that if they can just get to whatever that thing is that they need to conquer, that their whole life is going to be turned around. Well, many agencies, maybe even yours, is somewhere on that continuum where whether it's just struggling with the workforce issues and barely surviving, where managers and supervisors are covering shifts left and right, that vacancy rate is so high, or maybe you're on the journey, you've gotten past that spot, but there's still a ways to go. Today's episode and conversation, you're going to love it. It's with Kris Foss and Chet. They're from the University of Minnesota's Institute for Community Integration, and they're going to speak directly to what it looks like to get out of that survival mode and what kinds of things need to start getting implemented, first analyzed or looked at, and then implemented in order to get there. And they share a whole lot more than that. So buckle up. You're going to love this conversation. And without further ado, we'll get into it right now. Well, before we dive into anything else, why don't you each introduce yourselves and share what pulled you into this work and what kind of keeps you here? Like, why does this workforce side of human services just ring your bell?
I'll go first, Kris, if that's okay.
Yeah.
Hi, my name is Tschetter, and I work at the University of Minnesota as a workforce consultant for the Direct Support Workforce Solutions team. And I've been involved with this type of work a few decades now. Started as a camp counselor and then as a DSP, and it's just always piqued my interest and I've always had an opportunity to grow in the field and learn more and do more. With that, always keep in mind that the work that I'm doing is here to improve the lives or help the lives of people with disabilities. So that kind of keeps me going.
Awesome.
Ms. Foss, and I also work with Direct Support Workforce Solutions at the University of Minnesota's ICI. And I've been in the field, as Chet said, a few decades. It doesn't seem possible. Worked primarily for a provider organization in New York and Connecticut, and really didn't have background in this field before I started there, and took it, I think, as many of us kind of get into this field, as like a temporary gig. And then it kind of sucks you in, and rightly so. It's really great work, and I think what keeps me here is it's never boring. Between the organization I worked at for 19 years, I had an opportunity to create a consulting practice where we worked with large corporations on helping them attract and hire talent with disabilities. So that was kind of a different spin on it, or a different perspective on the work, and then ultimately back into working with organizations now on a national level on their workforce challenges. And the challenges remain the same, right? We've been talking about some of the same challenges for a long time, but I think what keeps me interested and hopeful is that there's always a new next generation to ask those questions, like what's next and why are we doing it this way? So different aspects of the solutions, I think, can have changed, and that's always exciting to me.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Well, I want to just throw you right in the deep end. Let's say there's a provider, a leader from a provider that's listening right now. They know that their agency is in survival mode, that they've got that vicious cycle, high turnover, high vacancies. There's obviously a lot of things that could be looked at, but if we're saying what's something they could just jump in on right away, like this month? There's something practical that they could start to look at. What would you recommend? Where should they start?
Yeah, Chet, okay, if I jump in? Um,
Absolutely.
I always say, and it doesn't cost any money, the very first thing, and you can do it quickly, is to ask your staff. So ask the people that have stayed, what's something different we can be doing to keep you, what that we could have kept your colleagues. And there's so many when we work with an organization, there's so many starting points, but really if when you're in that survival mode, when you're just like, what can we start with? Hearing from the staff that are there, that are the ones you trust, that show up every day and ask what we can do to improve their job experience or improve their ability to support people. I think just it's a start, right? And you can learn so much from them about
Hmm.
um I think we always think it's the big changes we need to make, the big expensive changes. So then we overanalyze it and don't know where to start. And sometimes it's small things that just build on each other. But we can learn a lot just by asking and being very open to the answers that we hear
Hmm.
and then starting to take action on those items and put a plan in place.
Yeah, I would say it really kind of piggybacks off Chris. It's also asking the staff, those who have stayed for a while, why is it that they stay? What are those
Yeah,
things about the work, about the people they're supporting, about the organization that really keeps them there? And those are the things you want to then think about. How do we build on that and do more of it so we can continue to attract these folks, but also continue to employ and retain those people who we've maybe hired more recently.
Yeah,
yeah,
no, that makes a lot of sense, and I hear what you're saying there, that it's not always just the big sweeping changes,
yeah.
Chris, but sometimes it's you start to pile on some small wins, and
Mhm.
they build up over time, and they
Yeah,
can compound. But starting with listening and asking, and you're right, that costs nothing. I mean, all that costs is effort. There's no, and it's not even it's an easy effort. It's nothing serious to just be able to sit down and ask people, what's going on, what's making this more difficult. Um,
absolutely. Yeah.
so now I know you guys do consulting with organizations. So when you start with a new agency, what metrics or data do you help them track? They probably already have a lot in their HR system or their payroll system, but what are you kind of starting to key in on? And then why does that matter?
Yeah, we actually developed a system called SupportWise Data that I would call a workforce planning tool. So it's taken all of the data points over 30 years of research and practice that we've worked with organizations for. It's taken kind of those important elements and
Hmm.
put them all together on a comprehensive view. And I think that's important because you're right, we have a lot of systems in place sometimes, and as a former HR leader, I would be asked to look at turnover or vacancy rates or, our wages. And sometimes we look at those in vacuum. So putting those things together, it's what do you look at? And I think looking at it as a whole is important. So turnover, of course, a big one we think of all the time. But more importantly, when is turnover happening?
Hmm.
Because the strategies that you would use to help to curb early turnover, those people that start and 2 days later they're running screaming from the building, right? That's costly turnover. That's those strategies look very different than what you would use to retain people that have been there 3, 4 years, and you're starting to see the turnover in those longer tenure employees start to creep up. So turnover, when turnover's happening, even looking at it, is it full-time versus part-time? Because that's
Hmm.
an important view too. Um, Vacancies certainly, um, but where are vacancies happening? Because sometimes, Chet just talked about it's those looking for those good practices or why people stay. We do that with data too, looking for those hot spots and those
Hmm.
bright spots.
Hmm.
Um, we take a look at I think it's important to look at wages, not just starting wages, which is a focal point of ours a lot of time because of recruiting and we want to be competitive to get those applicants in the door. But what do our starting wages look like versus the person that's been here 5 years? And is there a difference? Because that's important from a morale perspective. One of my biggest data points is cost of turnover, because I think if you understand what turnover is really costing you, that's a talking point that can help you put changes in place and get funding for changes to be put in place and understand whether you're getting a return on your investment. So those are probably the couple biggies that we start with.
Okay. Can you speak a little more on the cost of turnover? I know that the University of
Yeah.
Minnesota has actually published research around this. So what is the going the going cost these days?
Going cost. Well, we've seen studies that, and I would say there a few of them are a little outdated at this point. Kind of looking for more recent that are specific to our field, but we've seen anywhere from 5 to 7,000. I
Mm,
would say realistically, with the costs that keep going up, benefits, recruiting costs, advertising costs, all of that that go into it, turnover. We're probably looking at, I think we're probably looking at closer to $8,000 to $10,000 per person that walks out the door. And so when organizations and part of what we help organizations do is kind of what costs do you include?
mm,
And when they put that all together and look at it and see that number, even at $7,000 a person, if you in a year lose 100 people, that adds up. And so if you put a strategy in place that results in the next year in 5 more people staying than the year before, it's probably paid for itself.
mhm.
And so when we're always looking at funding, which doesn't increase the way it should, um, that's another way that I think organizations and employers can fund change, and they can have that as a talking point, but also measure whether it's working or not.
Okay.
Yeah.
Um, the I guess kind of we talked you talked for a minute there about recruiting, but I guess what are some strategies that you've seen work when it comes to recruiting? Or let's suppose an organization is really struggling with that early turnover. So maybe we're not just talking only recruitment, but also maybe that critical first 90 days. What are
Mhm.
some of the kinds of, I guess, common threads that you've seen with organizations that are succeeding versus when an organization is more struggling? What are maybe some common threads there that are things to be addressed?
Yeah.
I think one of the things I would uh, think about is what's going on in the selection or hiring process. And are the people that you're interviewing, are they are they being asked the right type of questions so they can really learn about them and so that they can also learn about the organization? So how you're setting up those interviews, how you're then making your hiring decision. Is it just upon the interview, or is it also based upon references and other sorts of um, information? Did they happen to do any sort of skills test when they were with you, which can be harder to do with the DSP, but maybe it might would be on a realistic job preview, which might be um, a tour or having an opportunity to meet the people that they might be working with. And how did the person react? Um, how did the applicant react to the person being supported? And, did they interact with them? And was it, seem natural? Or was it awkward? All of those things, and then making a good hiring decision based upon a variety of pieces to decide, is this person the right match for us, and are we the right match for them?
Okay.
Yeah, I would just piggyback on what Chet said about the realistic job previews. This is a term and a strategy that's been out there for a long time, but we've often seen people use it more as a marketing piece.
Hmm.
So, say they've created a video about the day in the life of a DSP. It tends to be more of kind of that marketing. How do you get people in the door? And so that, as Chet said, putting that in a selection process so that you're giving people a really truthful look at what the job entails before they say yes. And sometimes we hear recruiters say, well, we don't want to scare them off. And sure, we don't want to scare people off, but that is costly turnover. And so if you give them the opportunity to opt out of the process before they say yes to the job, they're going to leave with a much better impression. And you're not going to put the time and investment into having someone start only to leave because they were surprised at what the job is.
Yeah. Well, absolutely. So then, have you seen organizations that are doing this really effectively? What does that usually look like for them?
Yeah. So I think organizations that are carving it out of their selection process. So putting it in that critical spot before they offer them the job and giving it enough time that maybe there's some intentional questions or some follow up after the person has viewed a video or gone on that tour or gotten that impression so that um, you give people that opportunity to ask questions, you can answer questions, you can get a better feel for it. When we see people put that in consistently in place, I think that's the big thing, consistent, and that the recruiters are trained on how to ask those probing questions after the person has gone through that to follow up on it. I think that's where we've seen success.
Okay.
Um, I also think the other the other recruiting, I guess, tactic or strategy that we've seen, especially more recently, be helpful is to look at your demographic data. So we usually just look at it when we have to report it for, the feds or something like that. And
Yeah.
but our demographic data, who's on board now, can really tell a tale. And so if we see, for example, that we're hiring a lot of people under 30 years old, and that makes up most of our demographic, and those tend to be the people that are staying, then maybe we want to make sure that we're targeting our recruitment messaging in places where we would find more people in that age demographic, um, or speak in a way that appeals to that demographic. And we usually kind of throw out our recruiting messages kind of a size fits all. But really, organizations that are start taking the time to understand who are they looking for. So maybe in that same scenario, they decide, you know what, that's not working out so well for us. We'd like to look for people that are maybe a little older age demographic, maybe that would work for us better. So then where would you find those people? And what messages would and benefits and language would appeal to them? So organizations get really smart about their recruiting messaging and their brand
Hmm.
for their organization are seeing a lot more success.
And Nate, I think, going back to the interview process, doing a structured behavioral interview, which will include behavioral type questions and situational type questions, and being very intentional about what those questions are. And a lot of times you can ask the DSPs or the frontline supervisors, supervisors, um, you know, what are some things we should be asking that people are saying they didn't know
Hmm.
about the job? So we should include that in the interview. That can really help you in having that conversation with somebody about things that really matter to the other DSPs. The other DSPs really want the person to know about this is part of the job. Like it might be that um, yeah, it felt like other interviews you were just kind of glossing over. You're going to be helping people with personal cares, but you really got to tell people that they're going to be helping people with the shower and what that really means. So I think when you hone in those interview questions and what you're looking for in a response as far as, what's a really good response to that and what's an okay response, we can train someone who's got that
Yeah.
response and attitude, and what's kind of a response that we're like, "No, that's not really, like our company culture." Um, so that's what I was thinking about.
Yeah. Okay. So really honing those in. Now, if we take it then to like those first 90 days, I mean, I don't even know. Is that something that you guys are frequently talking with providers about? Does this come up a lot? And if so, what kinds of stuck spots do you see, and what kinds of adjustments, tweaks, or even overhauls have you
Yeah.
participated in helping providers make?
Yeah, I think those first 90 days are really critical. And I think often, especially that in organizations where they're doing some high volume hiring because they've got a lot of vacancies, people get into orientation training, they get through their required training, and then they're kind of thrown into the shift. And that's a scary situation for people. So it's kind of a couple different strategies. It's looking at that onboarding process, whether there's an opportunity to shadow or pair up with a mentor or some kind of on the job training that pairs with the classroom learning. Ideally, could they get some of that classroom or online training that they're required to take and then have some time in the program paired with somebody and then back into more training. Cause I mean, we're talking about sometimes people that they don't even know what questions to ask. So they don't have context to put what they're hearing in training. They don't have the context for it. So that's a piece of it. And then I think, we there's not a lot of funding for training. And so
Hmm.
that's what we hear from providers a lot, and totally understandable. And again, that cost of turnover. If we can spend the little extra money to have them shadow somebody a few shifts so that they don't feel like they're thrown into the deep end, um, that's an investment that could pay off and them not leaving. So that's a part of it. And then I think, we've talked with organizations a lot about career path opportunities for direct support staff, not just moving into a supervisory role, but some elevated roles within the DSP work, and being a mentor or a trainer to a new hire is one of those really great strategies that, to me, it hits on a couple different cylinders. So it's a
Yeah.
retention strategy, it's growth and a professional opportunity, and hopefully increased pay rate for somebody that's that go-to person that we're already relying on to train new staff, but we're recognizing that in a formal way, giving them increased salary. And it's connecting that new hire with somebody right from the start, that they get to know, and they have somebody besides their supervisor to show them the ropes a little bit. And so it helps stem that early turnover as well. So that's kind of like a 1-2 punch right there, that we really like to see organizations try. And then, I mean, really from the beginning, just making sure that everything kind of is, um, competency based, like that the job description really is reflective of what the job is,
Hmm.
not just a piece of paper that somebody sees once and it bears no resemblance to the job. Um, and I think putting in some engagement spots, like checking in with people the first couple days, the first 30 days. You can even do it with some quick questions, a check-in. So there's a couple different strategies like that we work with employers. And we've even, if they are wanting to look at career paths, another strategy is, we give people the same job description. They're a DSP when they start and they walk in the door, and they have a job description that's a couple pages long with everything from how to fill out your timesheet to how to save a life. And it's a lot. And you have that same job description that follows you your whole career, that stays with you your whole career. We work with organizations. Let's carve out those essential things that you want somebody to be able to do, understand, and be responsible for in those first 90 days, and make that job description be a entry level DSP or a foundational DSP. And then at 90 days they graduate to the next level,
Hmm.
and that job description is a little more, the responsibilities are a little more what you would expect from that next level of DSP. And maybe there's a small pay bump. So you start them at one wage, and so that 90-day they get a little bump, and more just it's subtle things, but it really adds up to feeling like not overwhelming people, connecting with them, um, and starting to communicate that there's a career here for you. It's not just a job.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't think I can emphasize enough that connection piece.
Mhm.
You know, when you're new, you want to feel connected to others in the
Yeah.
organization, to the organization, you want to feel valued. And that takes an um, intentional actions by the people who are working there. And not just the supervisors, from the other DSPs. It's just super important for people to feel like this is a place where I belong. And it does matter if I come to work tomorrow
Mm.
because somebody will miss me and I will miss them. So to me, that's one of the biggest things you can do. Especially in those first 90 days, it's really, really critical to have those check-ins with people and something that's, like, scheduled. So as a new employee, I know that I'm gonna meet with my supervisor, like, once a week or, a couple days times during the week, we're gonna maybe not be able to meet in person, but we're gonna meet by phone, and I'm gonna be able to ask them questions. Chris mentioned the mentor. What a great role for, someone who's kind of a seasoned DSP, knows their job well, probably really loves the culture of the organization, being able to kind of take that person under their wing and help them learn the job, and how things should be done. So that's a key one that I always take away.
Well, I think it's interesting what you're saying because there's often a lot of thought and energy that goes into how are we building our culture. But then what you're just kind of gave their tactics, they're not going to completely build the culture on their own. But without them, I feel like I've seen where it's easy for like, oh yeah, that'll happen. But if it's not actually scheduled or baked into it, that ingredient just stays on the shelf and it never gets put in the cake. And so having it where it is baked in, where no, you're going to have these touch points. Now, obviously, then you'd want the mentors and the supervisors to know how to handle those well. But just the fact that the difference it can make for a new employee in order for them to feel connected or welcomed, hugely different if those ingredients are actually embedded into the way they do things.
Yeah,
Yeah,
absolutely.
and And with a mentor, making sure that they're trained on what their role is,
Mm,
so they know how to be a mentor, a successful one. And that's also a retention strategy, right? It gives somebody an extra opportunity to really shine in a way that they contribute to the workforce. Because maybe I don't want to be a supervisor, but I might make a really good mentor because I really care about a new staff who comes in because I want them to take really great care of the person that we're supporting.
yeah.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think that's great. And I've heard that now really consistently from organizations that are seeing like below average turnover, or they've got good retention stats. I mean, I can't say universally, but that seems to be in a whole lot of them is that there's a lot of intentionality about mentorship for new employees.
Yeah.
Um, Now we're almost we sort of dabbled in this a little, but I want to get real into some of the details on supervision. How do how do you recommend, or I don't know how much these you do hands on with providers, how much you just kind of point and say, well, you need to go that direction. But providers want to build, um, they want to strengthen their frontline leadership.
Mm.
Um, what does that look like? Again, we know what happens a lot, which is, hey, they were a good DSP. There's an opening. Boom. Now they're a supervisor. Like that. We know that happens a lot. But what
Too
does it look
often.
like practically
Yeah.
to strengthen that frontline supervisors?
Yeah. We actually have a frontline supervisor training program that runs over, it's two parts and it runs over 9 months. I think the key ingredient with it is that it's a cohort approach to learning. It's a blended learning model. And I think I just saw this on one of your recent blogs, Nate, about the value and the power of people getting together, leaders getting
Yes,
together and
absolutely.
having that space, and that's what this is. So it's an opportunity for frontline supervisors. The way we usually model it is so that frontline supervisors from a variety of organizations can come together. It could also work with a large organization if they have a lot of frontline supervisors, but the idea is that it can be a very isolating job.
Yeah.
We're in the community, right? We're working in the community. People are working in different program areas, and they don't always have that time. They're putting out fires to come together, and so it's a very it's blended with some online learning, and then these opportunities to come together for rich discussion and shared learning. And that's been really, really valuable, and I think people learn from each other, they problem solve together, they share ideas, and that's been, I think, carving out time for supervisors to participate in something like that, whether it's a formal training program like what we have and offer, and I'm sure there's other ones out there too, or finding opportunities within an organization where you can get have supervisors come together to problem solve on a theme or something that's going on in the organization. So you're involving them in organizational decisions or challenges and solutions, but you're also giving them that opportunity to learn from each other and bring their strengths. But I do think having investing in those frontline supervisors for those basics of supervision, because like you said, it's tag you're DSP one day and you're in charge of a whole team of people the next day and scheduling and all families and people's appointments, so much. It's a really critical role. So investing in those people with some basics of supervision, it doesn't come naturally to everybody. We all need some coaching on how to coach others. Um, and finding ways that people can connect and learn from each other, I think is really, really important.
What kind of outcomes have you guys seen? Maybe it's just testimonial outcomes, but what kind of outcomes have you seen from this the training program that you guys have?
Yeah, Chet is one of our facilitators for it,
Okay.
so I'm sure you can talk about some of the testimonials, which have been
Yeah,
phenomenal.
it's been really great. At each of the sessions, we ask folks what they've applied to their job, of the things that they've been learning about the different skills, and they come back just really excited about, well, we tried setting up group norms for our staff meetings, and they really liked that.
Hmm.
And then we tried doing this other, strategy, and the staff thought that was great. And it just gives the frontline supervisor a lot more confidence in the work that they're doing, and just kind of being able to share that with other supervisors across the state or the organization kind of gets a little energy going around it, and they can share their ideas, and really that's one of the areas that they tell us they really benefit from, is that kind of group sharing and learning from each other.
Yeah. And there's been some numbers too, Chet, right? Like I think I'm probably I'm topping off the top of my head. I think it was 85+% of when asked indicated that they um changed the way they were supervising and it led to a positive outcome, or they learned something that is helping them in their job. So I'm kind of talking off the top of my head from some of those numbers, but we hear things like it's helped me to really understand how to respond to my staff and help them with their role. And so there's been a lot of good. Wish I had some. We can share some with you that maybe you want to share with some of the viewers. But there's been great testimonials, and yeah, I think the biggest thing. Oh, intention to stay, big
Hmm.
one. Huge percentage of participants have indicated their intention to stay now with their organization or in this field. And so I think that's a big one. We want people to feel like they have a career in this field. We need new leaders. We need that next generation of leaders. And frontline supervisors are one of the first steps into a formal leadership role. There's many different ways people can be a leader in this field, but we want them to feel like um, when they decide to start a family or they decide, what they want to grow in their career, that they can see themselves staying in this field and not having to leave it because there's not growth opportunities or um, professional development opportunities.
Oh,
And one of the ways that the people participating in the course can kind of measure their success and how they're doing is we build our course off the frontline supervisor competencies, the national
mm,
competencies, and they do an assessment at the beginning to see how are they doing in each of these areas of the different tenants. And then we do it halfway through or near the end so they can look at what are some things that I improved upon in the last few months, and what are some other areas that I want to continue to grow in. So that's been a real nice measuring stick. I think sometimes when they take it at the end of the class, they're like really surprised of the different things, the length that they came over that short amount of time.
that's really cool. I think that's a fantastic strategy, and it really strikes me. I mean, literally just hit me right now as you're sharing about this. So I'm trained as a behavior analyst, and we have a massive task list. You got all these supervised hours where you're like you're doing the job, but you've got someone that's a clinical supervisor, and then you have to pass this big test. And as you're going through that process, I mean, it's just like competency after competency that has to kind of get proved out. But some wise folks, right? NADSP, University of Minnesota, and others, but are putting out the content for that. But there certainly is no like nationwide, test or assessment, and I'm not saying that there should be that, but what can happen, I think, a lot of times is that an organization, like, okay, tag, you're it, boom, you're in. The goal of the organization is just keep working your job, and that we not it's not purposeful neglect, but that there are so many competencies to develop and to keep developing and to level up on. And so putting some language and definition on that with this pre and post assessments, I can see how that would be a huge, like, I mean, it would make me feel good if I was like looking back and like, oh, I guess this has really done something. I mean, I knew it did, but wow, to see the progress, um, and and then there's one other thing we're talking back at the collaboration piece. Kris, you were touching on this especially, where it can be isolating, especially in a residential setting. If someone's a residential supervisor, particularly, that it can be very isolating. And when there is coming together, usually it's for like staff meetings or solving, either communication from admin or from leadership, or kind of just like touching base on operational type of stuff, like, okay, we're rolling this out, this and all this. Not that that's bad, it's needed, but it doesn't always have that collaboration piece. So if you have to take the time and effort to invest, whether you're using a program such as the one you guys offer, and actually, I just started my first cohort. We're doing a beta group right now for frontline. Well, not just frontline, but for supervisors. That's focusing on building skills and stuff. But any kind of that type of investment, I think it's tremendously valuable. And a lot of, I think that it's not. It can be sometimes hard to prove what are the outcomes from that, but tying it to those competencies or other things like that, it can make a tremendous difference. So I see how that'd be so easy for an agency to start to invest in those ways. That's fantastic.
Yeah, and what you just described about the process that you went through, um, and having a competency set that was nationally recognized and that you needed to kind of prove out for certification, I think that's another thing that excites us and that we do at direct support workforce solutions is, we've got the work that we do with providers locally and states. And there's also this, I feel like, commitment to advocacy on a national level to professionalizing the workforce. And so when you think about those professions that we all recognize, like nursing or behavior analysts or, lawyers, accountants, there's always kind of a set of competencies that's recognized, and you can work in a variety of settings, but those competencies kind of hold true and become a universal language that all accountants know or all, are familiar with. And I think that's been something that's certainly not mandated across our field, but I think has gathered some steam because if we're going to say direct support professional and we want to professionalize the role, I think that starts with that universal set of competencies that we all agree on. When we work with organizations, sometimes people say, well, it's national. Like, I don't think it kind of fits exactly. It doesn't really reflect us. And so we do a lot of work with organizations on like, there's nothing in these competencies that's ever going to be like, oh, we don't want people doing that. It's all best practice. So let's start there as kind of a foundation and then wordsmith it and kind of make it your own, that it reflects, you can put your own brand on it, but it still is that foundation of this is what a confident and competent DSP or frontline supervisor um, does,
Hmm.
and how they what they're proficient in. So it's an important piece, I think. It's an important piece to professionalizing the role, getting the wages that people want to advocate for, getting the recognition nationally of what even a DSP is and does. And um, so that's a big piece of the workforce work is that
Absolutely.
national professionalization.
Yeah,
When we
absolutely.
think about frontline supervisors, we know because the data tells us, and we've heard it, for years. People don't leave their job; they leave their supervisor. So if we can train frontline supervisors and give them the support that they need to do their job well, that's also a retention tactic to help keep those really good DSPs.
Mhm.
And even those DSPs that are kind of like in the middle, help them improve because part of the plan is teaching frontline supervisors how do you bring those those kind of mediocre performers along so they can increase their skills and knowledge and attitude. And that's an important piece of the success of the organization.
Yeah, that kind of reminds me of something I want to ask you about, but I'll share something for a moment first, which is so my scope of practice on this is relatively newer, and so but what I have seen when we one time we were looking analyzing trends on about turnover and retention broken down by program, but broken down by supervisor, and
Mhm.
interestingly enough, um, it trended where there were like bright spots or hot spots. It trended more towards supervisors than medically complex, behaviorally complex. Like in my mind, almost like intuitively, I would think, well, if it's like medically complex or behaviorally complex, that's more likely to have more turnover because it's harder. But actually, at least in this one, again, this is just with one example,
Yeah.
but it trended more towards the specific supervisors. I was curious. You guys have certainly seen a lot more breadth of research on that or experience with that. Is that a thing? Like, I mean, do you ever see that where some of these bright spots or hot spots seem to correlate closely with like management practices?
I I I feel like it's two things. It can be practices, and so starting with that data of where it's like where that turnover is occurring, um, is kind of gives you the where to point to and look deeper, and then looking at what's happening, whether it's positive practices or maybe not so positive practices, can help, with those hot spots, bright spots. But I also think it's the looking at it. What we see is if you look at it with layered over that the turnover of the frontline supervisor too. So
Hmm.
where there's consistency in a supervisor, I think that's a big factor as well. And then looking at those practices. So I think I know my experience has been in the organization that I spent many years working at. We had there's one person that jumps out at me that was in our New York region that had she had zero, maybe one person turnover in her, and she had two residential areas that she was over, and she just had no turnover. And so, we were always spending these times like looking at the high turnover areas, and she didn't have she was supporting people that had complex needs in both locations. And when we asked her, tell us a little bit about your style of supervision and what you did. She did this practice that she called slaying the dragons. So she would have her monthly staff meetings, and instead of just concentrating on those things you mentioned before, like, make sure you're filling out your timesheets and doing this and this documentation, she'd start by just asking people like, what's going on with your life? What can I help you with? And people would tell her things. And, as an HR person, I was a little like, oh, maybe you shouldn't ask them that, at the time. But I mean, it was brilliant because people are people and we're in the people business. So she would see what was going on with them. And then she really had a great understanding of different benefits or resources that we as an employer had that could help people. So, she had almost all of her staff were utilizing tuition reimbursement and taking some classes, or, they were taking advantage of different other benefits that were in the organization. If she heard that somebody was having trouble getting to work because gas prices went up, she made sure that she rallied some resource for them to help them out. So, like, people have stuff going on at work, and we can't always expect them to leave it at the door. I mean, we would hope they could, but not everybody can. And people have some big dragons they're slaying, was how she put it. So that was a big practice and that made the difference. So medically complex homes, but she was there, she stayed there, she was there year after year, and she was having those conversations with people and helping them out.
I love that. That's so cool.
Yeah, yeah. I'll never forget that. It was like slaying the dragons.
Yeah. Oh, that's fantastic. Wow. I don't know about you, but I absolutely loved hearing about what they're doing and to hear how organizations can start to get their footing and their grounding when things feel like they're just out of control or when they're caught in that just nasty cycle of the high turnover and high vacancy and then just trying to cover shifts and it can get rough. I know it can get rough from firsthand experience. I loved how they gave a lot of insights and shared what to do about that. Now, this is only part one. The second half of this conversation is coming out next week. Or if you're listening to this more than a week after it's released, it's already out, so you can listen to it right away. But I always try to leave you with one action step, something that you can do right away. Here it is. Have you looked at your data lately? Are you looking at it? I'm sure you're tracking it somewhere in your HR system or whatever, but have you looked at it in a meaningful way with kind of that almost childlike curiosity to look for, wait, where are our bright spots? What's going really well? And then where are our, hot spots? What's not going so well? Where's the low-hanging fruit here? It's profound to me and amazing how often in the busyness and the what can feel like the chaos of it all, or just a lot of competing demands, understandably, how often executives aren't even in touch with that, or leaders aren't even in touch with that. And no judgment if that's where you're at. But that's why this is my challenge for you. Look at some of your data and look for patterns and trends and things that like the story might be hiding in plain sight of where you could first target things to turn things around. Or maybe things are going okay at your agency, or maybe they've been going really well and you just want to level it up. Still, your data is going to tell that story. Here's where you could level it up. So that's my encouragement, is to do that. And certainly if you want to get some additional help with that, by all means, check out their website in the show notes, because they have a whole tool that helps agencies look at their data meaningfully and helps break that down quickly for them. So I strongly encourage that as well. Anyhow, I so appreciate the work that each person I talk to, and we haven't talked other than me talking to you on this podcast necessarily, but I appreciate the work that you're doing in this field and making a difference in people's lives. And so until next time, here's to you. Keep up the amazing work.